Hey there guys, I am the Sixth Machine and welcome back to another Warhammer video. With the full official release of the Orc Codex today and the app finally getting updated properly, I wanted to make a start with some more of the unit reviews for the Orc units in there and going through some of my favourites and some which I think will be really fun or quite powerful to use on the tabletop. So I thought, what better way to start than with quite possibly one of the most powerful characters in the entire game right now, Mozrog Skragbad. Mozrog is a snakebite specific character and he has an absolutely gorgeous model with a very unique, almost shark looking giant squig as his mount, and he is, in my opinion, almost the perfect character. He is just so good at surviving as well as crumping pretty much anything that gets in his path. For a very reasonable 170 points, his stat line alone is nearly flawless, with a great movement of 10 inches, weapon skill 2+, a bad but not unexpected ballistic skill of 5+, strength 6, toughness 7, the perfect 9 wounds to let him benefit from Lookout Sir, an incredible 6 attacks, leadership 8, and a 3-up save. Now, of course, a 2-up save would have just been the cherry on top, but let's be honest, he isn't wearing mega armor, he certainly doesn't look like he justifies that kind of save, so in my opinion it's fine. The 3-up save still does serve him very well, and the kind of durability that he has from the stat line alone makes it not too much of a disadvantage. He can take a lot of damage, and at toughness 7 he isn't the easiest to get through wounds onto. And then of course when he does inevitably reach combat, thanks in large part to the fact that he can benefit from Lookout Sir with 6 attacks at weapon skill 2+, as we will see in just a moment when we get to his weapons, he can very easily take out vehicles, characters, or indeed whole squads of infantry all by himself. On the abilities front, first up he is a member of the Snakebites clan of course, and that grants him access to the Old Ways culture. And this culture has one brilliant rule for him, and one which will almost never come into effect. The latter of those is that against strength 7 or less, he can never be wounded on less than a 4+, which, being toughness 7, is pretty much always going to be the case anyway. It does have niche effects against things like poison 2+ weapons or blood angels with their +1 to wound and that sort of thing, but for the most part this won't be hugely impactful on Mozrog's durability. The second part of the Old Ways, however, is genuinely frightening on him, granting Mozrog a +1 to wound rolls when he's made a melee attack after he's charged or heroically intervened. Mozrog does have a huge number of attacks, and even more when you count his squig Big Chompa as well, so getting +1 to wound on all of those attacks, because it doesn't just specify the squig attacks, it's on all of your attacks, so getting +1 to wound on all of those means that he's going to be wounding pretty much anything in the game on 3s or even 2s, and then against things like the heavy stuff like Knights and Land Raiders, they are still going to be wounding on 4s instead of 5s when he's charged. It is honestly an unbelievably powerful buff for a character that has so many attacks at such a great damage profile, so the thing to take note with Mozrog, if nothing else, is always be charging. Always be charging. Mozrog wants to get stuck into combat as soon as he possibly can. And to help with that, Mozrog as an orc does naturally have the Here We Go rule, which was nerfed from 8th edition admittedly, but it is still very handy, granting you full rerolls when you make a charge, and it pushes something like a long bomb 9-inch charge from a 27% chance to a much more reliable 47%. So, I mean, it's still not guaranteed, but it is much more likely. And if you can get that little bit closer, an 8-inch charge goes from a 41% chance to a very much worth taking 65% chance of success. So it can honestly make a big difference in getting all of your units into combat that much quicker, which is obviously very handy for Mozrog. He is also a beast boss, of course, which gives him the war boss keyword, and this brings along with it not only the Warg rule, which is a key part of the new 9th edition Orcs, allowing all of your core and character units to not only advance and charge for a single turn, but also in that turn and the subsequent one, every single Orc unit gets +1 attack. So not just your core and your characters, but all of your Death Dreads, your vehicles, even your flyers get +1 attack for 2 turns. Now obviously this is a huge buff on Mozrog himself, with that 10-inch movement turning into a potential 16-inch move with advance, and then allowing him to charge afterwards with Here We Go. He can pretty much guarantee he's going to get a turn 2 charge, and if you were feeling really risky and you had deployed well or your opponent had deployed badly, you could always potentially call a turn 1 charge and go for that long bomb charge on turn 1. It is risky to be sure, but as I said, if your opponent has deployed badly and they put a key unit within range, it could well be worth a shot, and then obviously he would be swinging with 7 attacks instead of 6, which would just make him even more deadly in combat. Being a beast boss with the war boss keyword also brings a few other rules to the board for Mozrog. He has the I'm the boss rule, which means that you cannot have another war boss or speed boss in the same detachment. So you can't say bring Mozrog and then a regular beast boss or a war boss on a bike, that kind of thing. It is a bit of a restriction, but to be fair, it's one that makes total sense from a fluff perspective. And if you do want to bring another war boss or maybe a Deathkiller war trike in your army, you can just bring another detachment to put it in, so it's not an insurmountable problem in any way. The HQ style aura that a beast boss brings is, unlike the rerolls that tend to come with marine HQs, the arguably more powerful aura which is called Beast Boss, and that grants friendly Beast Snagger core and character units within 6 inches a flat +1 to hit in melee. And as you can imagine, this turns even your regular Snagger boys into absolute monsters. Hitting on 2s at strength 5 means that even a squad of 10 can be chucking out somewhere in the region of 30 odd attacks at -1 AP. It is a very, very powerful little aura to have, and whilst Mozrog does already hit on 2s, it does also help him in case he gets debuffed by a psychic power or his opponent has a natural -1 to hit in their profile. So all round, it is a very useful rule that Mozrog also brings to the table. It's worth noting, of course, that it does only affect Beast Snagger units, which is another restriction, but I mean, if you're bringing Mozrog as your HQ, you're probably going in at least somewhat into the Beast Snagger style, so you will undoubtedly have at least a few Beast Snagger units in your roster which can snuggle up nice and close to Mozrog and benefit from that +1 to hit. Of course, along that vein, as a Beast Snagger, Mozrog does benefit from the Beast Snagger rule itself, although it's one that doesn't do a huge amount for him. The Beast Snagger rule grants a 6-up invuln, which is meh, he already has a better invuln, and then +1 to hit against vehicles and monsters, which again is meh, he's already A hitting on 2s, and then he already has that +1 to hit aura from his Beast Boss rule. Now if your opponent manages to get a -2 to hit on a monster or vehicle, obviously this will mean that he is back to hitting on 2s again, so it can come in handy in very niche situations. However, the time it will actually be of use is that it doesn't specify melee attacks, so Mozrog will get +1 to hit if you aim his ranged weapon against vehicles or monsters, which brings his ballistic skill to a genuinely much better 4+ to hit. So it is worth remembering as you advance him up the board to shoot his thump gun, and if you are aiming at vehicles or monsters, he's hitting on, well, he's hitting on 5s because you're advancing him, but he isn't hitting on 6s, so the +1 does make a difference. And speaking of the invulnerable that I mentioned earlier, as I said, he does have a better one than the 6-up from the Beast Snagger rule, and in terms of his durability itself, he also has some other very, very strong abilities to help make his toughness 7 9 wound profile an absolute nightmare to get through. Tougher than a rock squig just grants him that flat 4-up invulnerable, which is a fantastic boost to his survivability when your opponent is more than likely to be sending high strength and good AP shots and attacks into him. So although he's only got that 3-up armor save, it's only dropping to a 4-up invuln even against things like Melter or las cannons or, thunder hammers and that kind of stuff. And as a reference, a squad of 10 intercessors in Tactical Doctrine rapid firing into Mozrog, if you discount the fact that they probably couldn't do that anyway thanks to Lookout Sir, will still only manage to get about 2 wounds on him, which means that his 9 wound profile is going to be sticking around for a very, very long time. Another rule he has for keeping himself alive is one that affects the heavier weapons and the stronger weapons that enemies might throw your way, and Thick Hide means that whenever an attack is allocated to Mozrog, you subtract 1 from the damage characteristic. So all of those damage to heavy bolters, autocannons and venom cannons they are now back down to a flat 1 damage. And even scarier stuff like the D3+3 Dark Lances will still feel that drop, going from a minimum of 4 damage to a minimum of 3. So it does make a difference, and although I think overall it's better against things that are a flat 2 or a flat 3 damage, it will still very much save your skin, literally, against the heavier D6 or D3+3 or D6+2 weapons that are so prevalent in the game these days. Next up, I'm going to go a little bit out of order because it's also worth mentioning when we talk about his durability, and that is Mozrog's warlord trait if he is your warlord. And this brings another level of depth to his survivability. Surly as a Squiggoth is overall a decent warlord trait. It's definitely not the best, and I do think that he would be better served with something like Arda's Nails, or even Beast Gob or Big Killer Boss, but it's not bad, and it can cause a real headache to your opponent. What Surly as a Squiggoth does is that when this warlord is destroyed, you can roll a d6 at the end of that phase, and on a 4+, you set him back up on the board where he died, and he comes back with d3 wounds. This is obviously very swingy, but could be incredibly powerful if in your opponent's fight phase Mozrog dies. You could potentially bring him back right on ready for your turn, so he gets that full movement phase, and then he can shoot and then charge and unleash all of his damage once again. And sure, with only 3 wounds maximum, he probably won't last too much longer again, but that does give you at least the possibility of an extra turn or 2 with Mozrog, and with a character that can do as much damage as he can, even just 1 extra combat phase could swing the battle in your favour. And on the subject of swinging the battle in your favour, let's get on to the fun stuff now, his damage output. And boy does Mozrog do this well. As we saw with his base profile, he has 6 attacks at strength 6, hitting on 2s. But he doesn't just hit things with his fists. Oh no. He has that terrifying looking claw on his arm, and that is his melee weapon Gut Ripper. And this comes with a very solid profile of +1 strength, -2 AP, and a flat 3 damage. So he is hitting at strength 7 with his 6 attacks, and if you remember as a snakebite, if he has charged, he's getting +1 to his wound rolls. So he's wounding things like predators on 3s, and marines and the like on 2s, and even land raiders on 4s. And in a warg, he has that extra attack as well. So that means that in a warg, if you charge with Mozrog, he can very reliably outright kill 3 aggressors on the charge before they can even swing back. But that is not all. In addition to Gut Ripper, he also has his trusty mount Big Chompa, who joins in on the fun. And if you thought Mozrog was powerful, being able to just insta-kill 3 aggressors on the charge, Big Chompa is devastatingly powerful. When you fight with Mozrog, you make 3 additional attacks with Big Chompa, and these are resolved at strength 7, -3 AP and a flat 3 damage, again with that +1 to wound if you've charged. But the big thing for Big Chompa is if you roll an unmodified 6 for your wound roll with one of those attacks, it instead does a flat 4, yes, 4 mortal wounds. So Big Chompa alone, not even counting Mozrog, with his 3 attacks, can do possibly 12 mortal wounds on your opponent. And sure, you might say that's very unlikely, but to be fair, you're hitting on 2s, and then rolling 3 6s to wound is unlikely, to be fair, but it's definitely not one of those 1 in a million set of odds that you see in the game, like trying to save, 20 armor saves or anything like that. Rolling 3 6s happens more often than you would think. And for each individual dice roll, getting a 2+ to hit followed by a 6 on the wound roll is around a 13% chance to happen. So with 3 attacks each turn, you are probably going to see a good number of those mortal wounds appearing over the course of the game. And on average, you have about a 40% chance to see at least 1 6 each combat. And with a command point reroll, if you fail to wound, that is even more likely to come up when you need it the most. It's worth noting quickly that the mortal wounds aren't in addition to the 3 damage from Big Chompa's jaws, they just replace it and the sequence ends, but still, that can do a monumental amount of damage from anything ranging from hordes to even Imperial Knights. All told, Mozrog can potentially, in a warg, put out a maximum of 33 wounds in a single combat phase, which is, quite frankly, insane. But even with average rolling, he will do almost 10 wounds to an Imperial Knight, or manage to chew through 3 or possibly even 4 Thunderhammer Storm Shield Terminators, which for his points cost is very, very solid. On top of that, he does have some token shooting, which is worth mentioning. He carries a thump gun with him, which is an 18-inch Assault D3 Blast, Strength 6, -1 AP D3 damage gun. And remember, if you are shooting at a vehicle or a monster, he's getting +1 to hit on that as well. It is a relatively decent profile all told, but even with a +1 to hit, he's not going to be doing a huge amount of damage with it over the course of the game. He can fire it as you're advancing thanks to it being assault, so definitely do keep shooting as you're moving up the board, and if you manage to kill a marine or do some chip damage on a tank, then that's just a nice little bonus. Don't expect too much from it, but definitely remember to keep firing it as you are moving around. So that is Mozrog's very, very long list of special rules and abilities. In my opinion, he is an absolute powerhouse in combat, and he can pretty much guarantee making it into combat thanks to his long list of special rules that he has, as well as his profile letting him benefit from Lookout Sir, which really, really does help him to survive. But on top of that, there are still a few stratagems and psychic powers worth mentioning to buff him up even more. And against the previously mentioned Imperial Knight, you might want to consider using 2 CP for the extremely niche, but in this situation very powerful, the bigger they is stratagem. This lets you, against a Titanic unit, add 2 to the damage characteristics of your attacks. So yeah, 5 damage attacks from Gut Ripper and from Big Chompa. Wow. It doesn't affect the mortal wounds from Big Chompa, it's worth noting that, but still, this moves the 10 damage you would do on average to an Imperial Knight previously to just around 15 wounds using this stratagem. But with 5 damage per attack, even just a lucky roll on your part, or a bad save on your opponent part, or just using a command point reroll, even if you just get 1 extra wound through, that is possibly putting the damage you do up by potentially 5, which is frankly ridiculous. It makes Mozrog very, very good against things like knights and other Titanic units, and really just charging into them and chopping them down to size. I would say maybe don't charge him into a full health knight because you may not do it, but if you have managed to do some chip damage to the knight and brought it down, to sort of like half health or whatever, Mozrog can very, very reliably kill it and just take it off the battlefield completely. Monster Hunters is another brilliant stratagem, although somewhat less so on Mozrog as he is a snakebite naturally. This lets you choose 3 Beastnagger units, and against a targeted enemy vehicle or monster, they get +1 to their wound rolls. This is handy for Mozrog if your opponent has the very rare -1 to wound style rule or that kind of power on a tank or a vehicle or a monster, but as I said, with Mozrog, he already gets that whenever he charges thanks to snake bites, so it's not as useful on him. It is still a great stratagem because you can do up to 3 units with it, and as I said, if your opponent has a psychic power that grants -1 to wound, then this is definitely worth remembering because you can bring Mozrog back up to winning on 2s or 3s if necessary. Orks is Never Beaten is another brilliant stratagem for Mozrog. It lets him fight, if he hasn't already, before he is removed from play if your opponent manages to charge in and kill him. Of course, this is even better on Mozrog, as he could get charged and then get killed, and then you use the stratagem to fight with him before you remove him, and then at the end of the phase, with his Surly as a Squiggoth warlord trait, he could come back to life again, and nothing can be more frustrating for an opponent than sending in their scary HQ to kill Mozrog, and then they get killed back by this stratagem, and then at the end of the phase you're like, oh, Mozrog is back again to carry on his rampage. The final stratagem I want to mention is Tough as Squighide. This is full-on proper transhuman physiology. So if Mozrog is being attacked by strength 8 and above, obviously the Snakebites special rule won't come into effect, so he will be getting wounded on 3s or even 2s if it is, say, an Imperial Knight. And if you need Mozrog to stick around, then for 2 CP you can use this, and like we all know by now, he can never be wounded on less than a 4+. And that will really help to reduce the number of wounds that are coming his way. It is a very handy stratagem to have. It's possibly a bit pricey to use on one model, but considering how much damage Mozrog can do, it may well be worth using it on him to keep him alive, just so you can get his damage output onto the battlefield and kill as much as you can. The final thing I want to mention with Mozrog is a psychic power which you can use on him, and that is the Spirit of Gork. This is a blessing with a warp charge of 6, and your Psyker selects a friendly squig unit, which Mozrog obviously is within 12 inches, and that unit gets 1 additional attack with its squig jaws. Now, as far as I understand it, this doesn't actually give Big Chompa an extra attack, because his jaws specifically state that you can only make a maximum of 3 attacks with his jaws. So that part is actually kind of wasted. But the second part means that an unmodified wound roll of 6, that attack does an additional mortal wound on top of any normal damage. So now, as I understand it, Big Chompa on a roll of a 6 to wound will be doing 5 mortal wounds. And with 3 jaw attacks, that is a potential 15 mortal wounds just from Big Chompa alone, which is crazy amounts of damage. I would say overall this power is maybe better used on something like a unit of Squighog Boys, as they get more benefit out of it. This essentially just gives Mozrog the chance for an extra 3 mortal wounds. But if Mozrog is there, he's in combat, it could well be hilarious to throw it on him, and if you manage to roll 3 6s to wound with Big Chompa, you could just flat out insta-kill a full 5-man squad of Thunderhammer Stormshield Terminators, which I really want to happen one day. I think that would be utterly hilarious. But there we go. That is it for Mr. Mozrog. He is genuinely a fantastic character for the Orks. He's undeniably brutal in combat, and with his durability and his rules, he can almost guarantee to be getting into combat when you need him to. He even brings a pretty powerful buff from his Beastboss aura for the rest of your Beastnagger units as well, so he does also act as a relatively decent force multiplier for the rest of your army. Whether he's better overall than a standard Beastboss on a squig who is a little bit cheaper and is a bit more customizable, I'm honestly not sure, but what is sure is that Mozrog can absolutely melt through pretty much anything you send him into, whether that's hordes of infantry, to space marines, to tanks, to Imperial Knights. He can do a huge amount of damage to them. And on top of that, from a model perspective, he looks absolutely gorgeous, which is just another lovely little cherry on top. But what do you think of Mozrog? Has he persuaded you to run a Snakebites list if you weren't already, and do you think he is perhaps a little bit too cheap at 170 points? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I will catch you later, guys.